Tonight, we are blessed to have with us someone I have known by email and telephone off and on over the years. And tonight, we met face to face. I think we may have bumped shoulders along the way in different situations. But Gary is, I know, an advocate of apologetics and defending the faith. If you don't know what apologetics means, it's about defending the faith, knowing what you believe and being able to explain to others in a loving but wise way of what it's all about to be a Christian and how to become one. So Gary Zacharias is a native Californian who went to Escondido High School. Any Escondido High School graduates out here? Okay, there's more about Escondido coming, hold on. So UCLA, San Diego State, where he received a master's in English. So if anything, we're gonna hear some words that we can understand tonight. He taught at a local high school, at UCSD, and at various community colleges until he was hired full-time at Palomar College. He thought, oh, that's where I know that name from. Palomar College. In 1990, he started as an English professor. Gary retired in 2015, but still teaches in English. Teaches a couple of classes each semester there at Palomar. The best class he ever taught was an introduction to the Bible as literature, where a student became a Christian because of that class. Gary's interests vary. Here they come. He loves sports, hiking, reading, politics, and astronomy. He has written and edited several books and contributed many articles to various publications. At his church, again, Emmanuel Faith in Escondido, he has led an apologetics class for 12 years. His main interest, however, is his wife, Sharon. Now we know. They have been married over 50 years and have two. He doesn't look that like he could, no, it's just impossible. He's a young character. He has 2 kids. They have 2 kids and 4 grandchildren. Now, here's the bizarre side of Gary. Gary knows more useless information than anyone should ever know. He lives close to, now let's see if you are an Escondido person. I just love reading these. These are bizarre bios, you know. He lives close to the infamous bomb house in northern Escondido. Does anybody remember the bomb house in Escondido? That news article, that thing that was on the 11 o'clock news. Wow, please explain when you come up. I'm vaguely familiar that somebody was building bombs in Escondido, but I'm old enough to remember. He treasures old technology. I like this guy. He loves his Walkman. Do you know what a Walkman is? Seriously, they're coming back to a degree. iPods and all that, Walkman are even older than iPods. And he loves his books on cassette. Where do you get a player for this, Gary? So I like this guy. He's my kind of guy, and he's going to be your kind of guy tonight as he brings us into a clear perspective on worldview thinking. So please pray with me, and I'll introduce our guest. Lord, thank you so much that once again we can be sitting at your feet, trusting that you'll use this vessel, Gary Zacharias, to touch our lives, to challenge us, to feed our souls what we need, to enrich our minds on how to respond to people, how to use tactfully the things you are going to teach us tonight, to plant seeds, to water them, to feed them, to harvest them. We know everybody's at a different stage, a different plateau, a different moment in their lives of understanding who you are and the gospel. But tonight we pray that we might be more equipped to specifically reach those who are heavy on our hearts tonight, maybe who have pushed away for so long. I'm grateful that some of my friends made decisions late in life and they decided to follow you. So we pray we could help others and nudge them your way through this information tonight and the work of the Holy Spirit. In Jesus' name, amen.
So I'm just curious, do we have any history fans in here? Okay. I read a lot of history. I don't know if you do. I'll read any kind of history, but one of my favorite areas to read is in American history. And out of all American history, this stands near the top for me. I mean, what an amazing thing, the American Civil War, that you had something like 600,000 deaths by the time that was over. You had armies of 100,000 plus clashing with other armies of 100,000 plus. My family had a chance to go back to Washington, D.C. years ago, and so we took a day trip out to Gettysburg. And anybody else been there, by the way? Oh, okay, wow, a lot of you. I don't know about you, but as I would read in a book about Gettysburg, I'd have these little maps, yay by yay, and they'd have dashed lines where the soldiers went and the charges and the countercharges. But then you drive there and you go, good grief, it's just huge. It takes you, practically the day to drive all over the place. I was just impressed with the size of this thing. You stand there at the bottom of the hill where Pickett's charge took place. They call that the high water of the Confederacy, where they made it up almost to the ridge, and then they're all, most of them are destroyed from that. But to me, this war has been just amazing. Well, we're in a war right now. And I know people think immediately of the Islamic, fundamentalists fighting and all, but listen to what Chuck Colson said here. He said the culture war is not just about abortion, homosexual rights, or the decline of public education. These are only skirmishes. The real war is a cosmic struggle between, there's that word, worldviews. So I want you to think about this idea of a worldview struggle, and it shows itself via skirmishes. So what are we talking about here? Well, think about, here's a map of Civil War battlefields, and you can see the whole East Coast is practically aflame. There were so many different battles that took place there. But those battles would never have happened unless, or I said they would not have happened except that there were two places on the East Coast that represented the heart of each attitude as far as worldviews go. There was the North, Lincoln, in Washington, D.C. They had a very different view, didn't they, of what America should be and how to treat African Americans and things like that. And then you had the Richmond group, you had Jefferson Davis, you had the Confederacy, had a very different worldview. They would never have had these red splotches all over the map unless there was this worldview struggle. The skirmishes, and I understand Christians get involved in skirmishes. They fight the abortion issue, or they fight same-sex marriage, or whatever it is, and that's great. I mean, Christians should be involved in this, but sometimes we as Christians don't step back and see the bigger issue. And that's what Colson's talking about, that there's this struggle going on, this worldview struggle. And James Dobson, head of Focus on the Family, originator of Focus on the Family, said something along the same lines, didn't he? Nothing short of a great, there it is, civil war of values rages today throughout North America. Two sides with vastly differing and incompatible worldviews are locked in a bitter conflict that permeates every level of society. And I wanted to stress that last part there. It affects every level of society. Now, in the Civil War, if a soldier went off, there were chances that he might die, but the people that sent him off, chances were they weren't all that involved in it, unless it was in their backyard where the struggle took place, the fighting took place. But look what Dobson is saying. There's no such thing as goodbye, I hope God takes care of you. We're all in this thing. Dobson said it permeates every level of society. In other words, we're all combatants. And I wanted to share with you a few verses so that you can get that feel for what Paul was talking about in different places in the New Testament. He talked about this a lot. He said, we demolish arguments and every pretension that sets itself up against the knowledge of God, and we take captive every thought. Okay, so do you notice what Paul is talking about here? You can hear offensive warfare terminology, can't you? That you go out as a fighter and you demolish, in this case, arguments. You're not really hurting people or things, but you demolish arguments and you take captive, right? That's what an army does. It goes out and gets the enemy and captures the enemy. And we're supposed to do the same thing when it comes to our thoughts. So this is Paul talking about us being offensive warriors for Christ. But he also says we should play defense as well. We ought to be defensive. He says, see to it that no one takes you captive. Don't you be captured through hollow and deceptive philosophy. And I wanted to take just a second. Is there a lot of hollow and deceptive philosophy today? Yeah, nobody's going to argue that. Let me just share one piece of deceptive philosophy. It was something that sold a gazillion copies when it came out. It was called the Da Vinci Code. Some of you, yeah. And don't be ashamed, I read it. It's a great read, it's a lot of fun. The catch is, once you get to about page 200, all of a sudden here comes the anti-Christian stuff. So they capture you at the beginning. Dan Brown did a good job. It is a fun read. It's a captivating reading, a little puzzle along the way. But at the very beginning, he's got one page before you even get into the story, and it says this: fact. Okay, so it says fact up at the top. All descriptions of artwork, architecture, documents, and secret rituals in this novel are accurate. So think of it this way. What Dan Brown is claiming is that, suppose you're going to write your own World War II novel. You might put Eisenhower in there. You might put Churchill, maybe Hitler. And then you might just make up some of the characters who, go in and do whatever they have to do during the war. But that would be a factual kind of story. You've got to tell the right story. D-Day was June 6, 44. You got to get that right. You can't start changing that stuff. Well, Dan Brown said he's doing something like that. He's not. He didn't get his architecture right. He didn't get his history right. He didn't get Jesus right. He didn't get the New Testament right. Other than that, it was really factual. Okay, a little sarcasm there. But, that's the kind of stuff. And there were people who walked away from the Christian faith. You could just laugh about it, except there were people that said, gee, I didn't know that about Jesus. I didn't know that about the New Testament Gospels. Well, the reason they didn't know it is it wasn't true. But that's the kind of stuff that's out there today that Paul has been warning people for 2,000 years. Don't you get captured by deceptive philosophy. And in fact, he says, don't go out fighting with your flip-flops, your shorts, and your T-shirts. Put on the armor of God. We're in a struggle. And a lot of people, they just kind of float by and they don't think about that. So how are we doing? We're in a fight. Well, here, back to Colson again. What does he say? The church's singular, what? Failure in recent decades has been the failure to see Christianity as a life system or worldview, we'll talk about what that means in just a second, that governs every area of existence. He said, we're not doing that. Christians are not doing this. And so that's going to be my challenge for this evening, to get us thinking in worldview terms rather than those individual skirmishes. And again, I have no problem. I hope you do get involved in some of these issues that seem to be going against Christian values. That's great. I'm glad there are people that do that. But I'm just saying tonight, let's see if we can step back and see a bigger picture. So if you've ever gone into a drugstore or wherever they sell dark glasses these days, because you lost yours, you sat on them. Am I the only one that ever sits on dark glasses? So you go in there and you look at it and you go, good heavens, I've got a lot of choices here. So you try the blue ones on. Do you notice when you put the blue ones on, the whole world has a different cast to it, doesn't it? Or you put the yellow ones on. I like to ride a bike in the morning when it's kind of early, so I got to protect my eyes because I got contacts. So I'll put yellow glasses on because they don't darken things very much. But it's a different cast. Look at these different colors here. Whatever you decide to put on is going to change your world view, isn't it? Every one of those. So what's a worldview? Well, we could say this. Everybody's got a worldview. Now, I bet if I went to your home and looked on your refrigerator, I bet you didn't write a worldview that you look at every day. Nobody does that. But we have absorbed a worldview, either from our parents or from our friends or what we've read or just watching television. But we all have a worldview. There's nobody that does not have a worldview. Everybody's got a worldview. And so you can define it maybe in one of two ways. It's how you look out at reality. So I gave an example in the parentheses here. If you're a materialist, that means when you put your glasses on and you look out at the world, you say, the material world is all there is. That's it. It's whatever I can see, whatever I can take a picture of, whatever I can put in a beaker in the lab. That's it. That's called a materialist. Christians have different glasses. They say, there's more to reality than what is seen. There's the unseen. There's the supernatural. There is the soul. A lot of things exist beyond the things that you can actually see and measure. Or you could say maybe it's how you interpret all of life. If you're a Hindu and you walk down the streets of Calcutta and you see somebody suffering there, chances are, because of the way you interpret life, you'd look at that person and you'd say, This is payback. Karma got him because something was going on in that past life, and now he's paying back through karma. So you don't get as involved with that person because you're saying, I don't want to interrupt the karma that's going on here. So that's a worldview, and I'm not criticizing at this point. I just wanted you to think about, when you wear a different pair of glasses, you're going to see things differently. I wanted to start by thinking about worldview, looking at worldview in the small scale rather than the big stuff here. I've got some signs and I've got some bumper stickers, okay? Have you seen this one, the coexist one? It's been pretty popular. It's been around a long time. That really represents a worldview, doesn't it? You think about it. Look where Christianity is. It's one of a bunch. Nothing different, nothing special about Christianity. It kind of suggests to me somebody that buys into religious pluralism. And it kind of suggests to me that this person, whoever slaps that on the back of their car, may be thinking that it's religions that are causing the problems today. If we could just get religions under control, this would be a beautiful world. We could sing Kumbaya and gather around a campfire. Anybody seen this one? Have you heard of a group called the Brights? The Brights? They're a bunch of atheists who have no problem with their egos because they call themselves the Brights. And you know what that makes us? The Dims. They don't say that. But it's kind of implied. I mean, take a look at what is being said here. Believing is fine. Guess who the believers are? That's us, for the most part, if we're all Christians here. We're the believers. And they say, that's fine. So they pat us on the head. Go ahead. Sing your songs. Pray to this being that you believe in. Go ahead. That's okay. What's better, though? Thinking. So what does that say about us? Are we thinkers? Not according to this bumper sticker. We do a leap in the dark. We just whistle in the dark. We just hope that there's a God out there, but we have no reasons for it. So we just believe. And they say, well, good for you. I read a story one time, true story, an article that was in The Reader. Anybody ever see The Reader? That big fat thing that comes, is it still being published? I haven't seen it for months. Okay, they must sell it by the pound. I mean, it's just huge. So one of the people who was doing a report for The Reader went down to Balboa Park. And I guess on the weekends, a lot of people set up tables. And they'll have an atheist table and a Jehovah's Witness table and a whatever and a whatever. And so he was just reporting on what happened at the atheist table because he thought that'd be kind of interesting. He said somebody who's obviously some sort of religion, didn't say what, walked up to the guy who was sitting at the atheist table and did not engage him, did not want to get into a discussion, just said, I'll pray for you. And then turned around and walked away. And you know what the atheist said to him? I'll think for you. Oh, that hurts, doesn't it? But that's that bumper sticker. That's what the bumper sticker is saying. Then there's this one. This came out during the time when Trump was president, Make America Great Again. Well, now you've got the ecology or the environmental glasses on this time. This is a Sierra Club, Make America Green Again. So they see things in terms of how we're doing with the environment. Here's one that was put out by a pro-choice group, bumper sticker, against abortion that don't have one. Can I just take a second? I know I'm supposed to just present this stuff, but I want you to think about this for a minute. This really bothers me because do you hear what it's saying is that Christians or people who are opposing abortion are opposing it because it's their personal taste that's involved. They just don't like it. Kind of like you're watching a television show and you go, ew, I don't like this. And somebody says, well, turn it off. Change the channel. But that's not what Christians are saying. We're not saying, oh, I don't like it. We're saying abortion is bad for everybody. It's bad for the mom. It's bad for the child. Child's dead. It ruins society. It lessens our appreciation for life. It coarsens our society. I mean, can you imagine if 150 years ago it said against slavery, then don't own one? Nobody would say that. That makes no sense. Those people back then, that some of them lost their lives to fight slavery, they said, it's not that I don't like slavery. I think it's bad for our society. It's terrible for slave owners. It's terrible for the slaves. It ruins the society. So I just think that's a terrible bumper sticker, but it does represent that viewpoint there of the pro-abortion side. Anybody seen a sign like this? There's one of these in our neighborhood. And I walk past it every once in a while. And someday there'll be somebody standing out there, and then I got to be real careful. But it's interesting because we could spend the whole evening just on this sign, couldn't we? In this house, we believe, and here it comes, and again, this is I would say it's one set of glasses that they're wearing. This is a worldview. Black lives matter, women's rights are human rights, no human is illegal, science is real, love is love, kindness is everything. Again, that's a view that they see regarding the world. Let me take you now to a worldview statement. So you've seen some kind of, small stuff, but here's an interesting perspective from a man who is a Cornell University professor. So a very sharp individual. He's a materialist. He doesn't see anything beyond this material world, and so he puts down, in his own words, what this idea has consequences. So he says, here are the consequences if I buy into this materialist worldview. So here we go. There are no gods, right? If you're a materialist, there's nothing beyond this world. No purposes. You're a fluke. You're an accident. There's no point to this life. Just gather as much stuff as you can before you die. There's no life after death. When I die, I'm absolutely certain that I'm going to be dead. That's the end for me. And he continues, there's no ultimate foundation for ethics. Wow. We're going to touch on this again a little bit later tonight. But I want you to keep that in mind. This is a huge issue. If you're a materialist, you have no firm foundation for what's right and what's wrong. So we'll cover that in a minute. No ultimate meaning to life. Why are you here? I don't know. What are you supposed to accomplish while you're here? I don't know. And no free will, really? For humans, but he's being honest about it, because if you're a materialist, these things come about. And so he put this out in print. His name is William Provine, Cornell University. So tonight, let's look at two worldviews. They're the two that Colson and Dobson were talking about. These are the two that are clashing. Are there more worldviews than this? Yes. New Age would be a worldview. Islam would be a worldview, different pair of glasses looking at things. But we're going to take Christianity and secularism because they are the two that are the predominant ones that are battling it out. So tonight we're going to talk about four things that worldviews struggle and try to come up with answers to. Four questions. Now, are there more than four questions? Yes. But just because of time, we're just going to kind of make it simple tonight. Just look at these four. Here are the questions. Where do we come from? That's called the issue of origins, meaning the human race. All right, well, now we're here. What's right and what's wrong? That's the issue of morality. What's wrong with people? Well, everybody thinks the human race has gone off the rails. I mean, we all agree there's a problem. The big issue is the solution. How do we fix this? What's the way to get things back on track? So what I'm going to do is this. We're going to look, first of all, at Christianity, secularism, how they answer each of these questions. We're not going to evaluate. We're not going to put one down or whatever, just to get a kind of a picture for what they would be saying, kind of the theology behind both perspectives. Then we're going to go back, and I hope to demonstrate tonight, Christianity is a far superior worldview between these two. So let's start with origins. Pretty obvious, huh? Christianity says, well, the Judeo-Christian worldview says there's a God. There was nothing. He created everything. Created humans, and humans are different. There's something special about humans that's called the imago Dei, the Latin meaning the image of God. We are created differently than the animals. And history is actually going somewhere. In the Old Testament, the Jews are chosen. They sort of channel heading toward the New Testament. They're the method of redemption. Jesus shows up in the New Testament. He leaves, but he says, keep the work going. The kingdom of God is, we've made an invasion into the devil's land, and keep working at it, and I will return. So there's a feeling that there's progress. History is going someplace. Well, you could take secularism and just flip all four of these upside down, couldn't you? No God. Then there's no creation outside of the universe. It brought itself into existence. We're not special image bearers. We're a clever animal. And history, is it going anywhere? Not for the secularist. You just have surging of nations comes, nations go, strong people come along and push things along, but there's not really a sense of, there's a direction that things are going. What about morality? Now we're here, what's right, what's wrong? Well, Christians say it's God's nature is the standard, so it's not here in this world. There's a standard beyond the human race, outside of us, and there is real right and there's real wrong, and it's spelled out throughout the Bible. But we have free will. God honored free will so much, he let these creatures, he let us have free will, and we often make really terrible choices, and we're held accountable because we have free will. Nobody put a gun to our head. We weren't forced into these things. We actually did things wrong, and we knew we were doing them wrong. So how about secularism? Where's the standard? It's not out there because there is no out there. You're going to have to create your standard here in this world. And we're going to come back to that a little bit later. Is there real right and wrong? Not so much anymore. It's kind of relative. It's how you feel at the time. Free will, remember what Provine said? It's gone. There's no free will. And so we may be accountable because we broke a speed law, we'd be accountable to other people, but we're not accountable to any kind of divine creature out there. How about the problem? Christianity says, whatever word you want to use, sin, disobedience. You might think of it this way: there's a sovereign to the universe, and we've decided to be rebels. We've shaken our fist in the sovereign's face and said no, and we've walked off and started a rebellion. And that moment of rebellion that's continued all through the course of our existence as human beings has ruined us, our relationship with each other. It's ruined our relationship to ourselves. It's ruined the relationship with nature, but most of all, it ruined the relationship with us and God. It just tore the fabric of everything apart. And there's evil inside all of us. I wanted to share something with you here. Do you recognize the name Alexander Solzhenitsyn, the Russian dissident? Tremendous person. He came to the United States, and people loved him to death until they heard him talk, and they realized, oh, he's a Christian. And he went to Harvard, and he gave a talk that really ripped into the secular mindset there, and he didn't get invited back, but he's an amazing person. Here's what he had to say, talking about where is evil. He says, if only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us, kind of draw a line. They're the evil ones, we're okay. He says, but the line that divides good and evil is where, he says, it cuts through the heart of every human being. So here's where the evil is. It's not that person over there, that group over there. We can point to ourselves when we talk about evil. So we have guilt feelings because we know we've fallen short not just of God's standards, we fall short of our own standards. We can't even live up to what we think ought to be correct behavior. Greg Kokel, I like him a lot. I hope you recognize that name. He runs an organization called Stand to Reason. He said when he goes and talks to a group about topics like this, he says, I know something about you I bet you don't think I know. He says, you all feel guilty. He said, I do too. He said, you know why? Because you're guilty. And he says, there is an answer for guilt. And of course, he's going to take people toward Jesus. But what about secularism? What's it going to say? Is disobedience our problem? No, the problem's here. We're basically good people. So you look around, it's some kind of structure that's messed us up. Capitalism, or it's, whatever, the educational system, or poverty, or something like that. Is there evil in us? No. We're pretty good people. Yeah, there are a few bad ones. There's the Hitlers. I always like that. You ever hear people say something like that? Well, I'm no Hitler. Well, that's a great standard. And so the guilt feelings may be because of mom and dad. They laid some guilt on you, or somebody else laid some guilt on you, but you're not really guilty, unless you do break a law, but certainly not guilty to some other standard out there. So the solution, what does Christianity say? We are so guilty, we are so broken, salvation has to come to us. And it's going to be unmerited. We don't deserve it. There's not enough that we could do to reach that level of holiness that God has. And so we're rebels. We're supposed to lay down our weapons and say, I'm back, kneel in front of the sovereign. And secularism says, no way, never. We're not going to do that. We will figure it out. We'll solve things here on earth. Just let me take whatever, we'll talk about some of the solutions that have been offered. They always end up in a disaster. But they say, we're not going to submit to God. There is no God. We'll fix it. And so there's this great optimism that you can fix it right here. So here's where all of you come in. I hope this is not just a Friday night kind of thing, but that you go out of here and you make a case. And I'm hoping you make a case in two ways. Here's the first part. Christianity is going to offer a reasonable answer. It's got a set of reasons. Isn't that an interesting word? A lot of people think Christianity is not reasonable. It's just that leap in the dark. It's just hoping. You just feel good because you come on Sunday and get to sing songs. A lot of people think that's what Christianity is. No, it is a rational, reasonable faith that you can have. And so we're going to demonstrate that, I hope, in a few minutes. The other thing is that Christianity is the closest correspondent to reality out of all these different worldviews. It comes closest to saying what we are as people, how the world operates. It's closer than any other worldview. I think about, do you remember Heaven's Gate? Those people in Rancho Santa Fe that thought there was a spaceship behind the Hale-Bopp comet. Now you talk about not connecting their worldview to reality, and they put themselves to death. It was a tragedy, but they were just so far from reality. And Christianity says, no, there's a better reality than that. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to go back now over these four issues, origins and morality and the problem, the solution, and we're going to look at the two, Christianity and secularism, and I'm going to be making the case tonight that Christianity is more reasonable, it is more rational. So, can we start with this? That's my representation for the Big Bang. That was actually a name that was coined by somebody that didn't like it. He was making fun of it. Big Bang. And it caught on. It must have driven the guy nuts. But so that's what we have today. It's called the Big Bang. Not too far up here, up above Pasadena, in the high hills there is Mount Wilson. I always want to say Mount Palomar, Mount Wilson. And back in the 1920s, that was a happening place. It was the biggest telescope of the time. Palomar hadn't been built. That was the 1940s. And there's a man up there named Hubble. They've named that big space telescope after him. So Hubble started looking at galaxies, these collections of stars. And he noticed for the first time, because his telescope was huge, it was bigger than anything else, he noticed these galaxies appeared to be flying away from us. And he thought, what's going on? Are we in the center of everything? But then he realized if you could take a balloon and you blew it up and you put dots on the balloon, every dot would look like the other dots were moving away from it. Well, that's what's going on with space. Space is expanding, and we are moving like all the others, but it's just from our perspective, it looks like everybody's heading away from us. And that's what they mean by the Big Bang. Well, that's the 1920s. When that came out, it was really interesting. I've read a lot about this because I think it's fascinating. It was interesting to see what the reaction was of scientists at the time. You'd think they'd say, well, surprised me, but okay, because up till then the idea was that the universe had just sort of always been here, it's kind of a forever thing. But there was a man, just to give you, I'm going to give you two examples here. One man named Eddington, he was a world famous physicist. You know what he said about the Big Bang after it was pretty well established? He said, the idea of the Big Bang is repugnant to me. Now, that word repugnant really got to me. I thought that was fascinating. Here's a scientist who says, here's the theory, I find it, icky. That's not normally what scientists say. They say, interesting idea or stupid idea, but they don't say, I don't like it. Well, you know why he felt that way, and so did Einstein. I'll tell you a story about him in a second. You know why they felt that way? If there's a beginning point and a Big Bang, something had to get things moving. There had to be a big banger of some type. So, and then you don't have enough time for evolution. That's another issue, because now you only have a set period of time. You don't have forever to get things to evolve. And so for a lot of scientists, they felt really uncomfortable with this. Einstein was so uncomfortable, he looked at some of his calculations, and his calculations in his general theory of relativity actually suggested the universe was expanding. So he said, can't have that. And he wrote in a new piece of his math. He called it the cosmological constant. And now, with that in there, it suggested the universe was not expanding. Well, they kept doing more and more tests and all, and finally he had to back off. He said, that was the biggest mistake of my life. I mean, but you see what's going on? A lot of scientists were dragged kicking and screaming to the idea of the Big Bang. That's not a threat to Christianity. Big Bang is in our corner, because you have to ask, well, how else do you get the universe started? Something outside of matter, space, time, and energy, right? Those four things come into existence. The universe can't create itself. Something outside of this natural world had to bring it into existence. What do you call things outside this natural world? Supernatural. That starts sounding a little like God, so some people are a little upset about that. I want to do some other origins. Think about this. So you get the universe here. Well, now you got to get life going. It doesn't do any good just to have hydrogen and helium floating around. You got to get the planets going, and you got to get life started. And now, thanks to all sorts of microscopes, they have electron microscopes, they can dig deeper and deeper and deeper into cells. During Darwin's time, a cell was just considered to be sort of a bag of protoplasm. It was like pretty stupid, Of course that could happen. That could come about naturally just on its own. But this gives you just an idea of what's going on inside a cell. Let me read something to you here from a man who is not a Christian. I always like to use people who are not Christians, because if they can make the case for me, all the better. So he's a biochemist. His name is Dr. Michael Denton. And he said this about the cell. He said, if you can imagine shrinking down till the cell is way bigger than you are, so you could really get a good look at it. He said, on the surface of the cell, you'd see millions of openings, like portholes in a spaceship, and they're going to open and close. They allow a continual stream of materials to flow in and out. A huge range of products and raw materials shuttle along in a highly ordered fashion to and from various assembly plants that are in the outer regions of the cell. We would see all around us, in every direction we look, robot-like machines. I'm going to show you one in just a second. It says the cell has artificial language, it has decoding systems, it has memory banks for information storage and retrieval, control systems involving the principle of prefabrication and modular construction. He said this would resemble an immense automated factory, and he ends up by saying awe-inspiring. But he's not a believer. But I mean, do you see how? I don't know how you could watch something like this or see something like this without thinking, this is incredibly complex. How does this come about? Out of just shaking up a bag of protoplasm. I wanted to show you something inside the cell here. This is one of these molecular machines that they were referring to. It's called Dynan. Does it look like it's walking? I mean, it's just a still picture, but do you see those leg things? This is a microtubule. By the way, it's that conduct that they were talking about, places that would allow you to take things back and forth. These microtubules fall apart and go off and do other things, and they come together when something has to go across it. So it'd be like taking the I-5 every morning and put part of the freeway together so more traffic can go through one way, and then it takes it apart in the afternoon and puts it on the other side. We can't do that. But that's a microtubule, and this thing really does walk. It goes step by step by step, and it's carrying something that the cell needs, so it carries it from one place to the next. This is just one of these molecular machines that's going on. If you have a chance, there's a video called Voyage Inside the Cell. And if you go to Harvard, you can just type in the word Harvard, do a Google search, and they have like a 5 or 10 minute, I forget how long it is, you can just watch it, it's free. And you can see these things going on inside the cell. Now, this is Harvard, not exactly a bastion of Christianity these days. But it shows you these kinds of things, and your jaw drops when you see what's going on. They couldn't see this 50 years ago. But that's just one example of the motors that they're referring to here. Here's the third thing that we're going to talk about. Okay, so, you get this kind of life started here, but in the last, again, maybe the last 40 years, 30 years, they're discovering all sorts of things about the universe on the big scale and the small scale. So just to give you an idea on the big scale, here we go. I brought in, this is a list of fine-tuning that's needed to have life in the universe. They're finding they have to have so many things exactly right. I'll give you just a couple of examples. The strong nuclear force has to be exactly the right amount of force or you don't get the universe. You have to have the right weak nuclear force. You have to have the right kind of gravity, the right kind of electromagnetic force, the ratio of proton to electron mass. I don't even know what some of this stuff means. There are over 100 of these that have to be exactly right or you have no universe. You don't have any life in the universe. And then the Earth needs to be fine-tuned. There are over 400 features that they're coming across now that have to be exactly right. So if you can imagine like this whole front here full of hundreds of dials, and those dials have to be set exactly right or we don't stay here. We wouldn't function here. So let's just take the Big Bang. If the Big Bang expands any more slowly, you just get hydrogen and helium. It just stays this big clump. Right? Nothing turns into stars or planets or us. If the expansion rate is too fast, stuff flies apart and it won't collect as planets and stars and us. So even something simple as, when it's called the Big Bang, by the way, that's kind of a joke name for it, but don't think of it like an explosion, like a grenade going off. It's a very carefully planned expansion. By the way, do you know it's in the Old Testament? There are several references to the expansion of the universe. It says God stretches out the heavens. It's really fascinating. It's in Isaiah and Job and a couple of other places, but anyway, that's a different talk. So you've got all sorts of design that has to be exactly right on the big scale. And then what have they found in the last 50 years or so? That you've got this twisted, it's called a double helix, in the DNA. So think of it almost like a rubber ladder. So if you could untwist that ladder and then break the sides apart, then you'd have these rungs that are made of 4 different chemicals, A, G, T, C. Things come along and they read those rungs, and then that allows them to create proteins. So it's a computer code, depending on how many A's and G's and C's and T's are next to each other. So it's a 4-bit code, not like a computer. A computer's 2-bit, isn't it? On and off, zeros and ones. This is a 4-bit. Bill Gates said this is the most complicated computer code ever. Does he know computers? Yeah, I think so. So this is going on the small scale. They didn't know this a long time ago. Here's another origin issue that I think lands on our side, not the secular side. And that is, where do we get consciousness? Where does consciousness come from? And if you notice the book titles, a lot of people who are investigating this call it the problem of consciousness. Well, it's only a problem if you're a secularist. How do you get consciousness from stuff that's not conscious? It's just cellular material, it's just carbon, it's just hydrogen, whatever. How does that come together and one day go, aha, and a little light bulb lights up, and somebody's home, right? How does that happen? And so the Christian says, we got no problem with consciousness. God's implanted that in us, mind or soul or whatever you want to call it, but we're more than just physical creatures. There's something inside of us. So, let's take just these. We're still doing the first of the 4 issues, just talking about origin. Look at these 4 origins and decide, and I hope you feel like I do, that Christianity offers a far more robust, reasonable, rational approach to these things. The Big Bang is either outside of the universe or something came out of nothing. Well, that's never happened to me. Has it happened to you? You ever look at your neighbor's yard and he's got a brand new car there and you go over and you say, hey, nice car. Did you just buy it? No. What do you mean? Well, we just woke up this morning and it just showed up here. Well, did the dealer drive it over so you could take a look at it? Did a friend of yours drive? No, just showed up. Out of nothing. You'd say, what are you imbibing? What's wrong with you? Those things don't happen. How about the start of life? It's either God or you get life from non-life. That doesn't happen. Design. It's either God designing it or you get design from chaos. Somebody once said, it'd be like if you're a secularist, it'd be like saying a whirlwind came into a junkyard and twirled all the pieces in the junkyard into a 747. That doesn't happen. But that's what you have to believe if you're going to be on the secularist side. And then design from chaos, consciousness. Consciousness came from non-conscious. That's what you have to say. I think Christianity wins in the area, just the first issue, which is where did things come from? Let's move on to the second issue, morality. Well, if it really comes to it, people do believe in actual right and wrong. They can tell you all day long that they're relativists. But when they tell you that, just start stealing something from them and head out the door. All of a sudden, the relativism is long gone. They're going to say, wait, you can't do that. What do you mean you can't do that? That's my standard. You complaining about my standard? We hold people to a higher standard, don't we, than animals? And we say, you should or shouldn't. We point fingers. You should or you shouldn't do that. That's actually indicating something really, really important about morality. We think there is a standard above what I feel or what I believe. I got to tell you a quick story because I think it's funny. It illustrates this problem with relativism. I hope it's a true story, but I don't know. Supposedly a philosophy teacher is talking about relativism and actual right and wrong and things like that. And so he required a paper. So the student who is a relativist made a big deal about being a relativist. Wrote this paper about how relativism is true, blah, blah, blah. Turns it into the teacher. Teacher gives it back the next class period and it has a big F on it. And the student is irate because he was a really good student. So he goes into the professor's office. He says, hey, didn't I do the right word length? Yeah. Wasn't it formatted correctly? Yeah. Didn't I do parenthetical references and I had it works cited and all of that was okay? Yeah. Didn't I make good, clear arguments? Yes, you did. Well, why is it an F? The teacher looks at the cover and says, I don't like blue covers. And the student starts thinking, oh, wait a minute. His standard, if I'm going to say we all have different standards, then he's got a right to do that. But that makes no sense to give somebody a bad grade because you don't like their cover. So the student said, oh, and it was just a joke. The teacher didn't really give him that bad a grade. But I mean, you're kind of in trouble with this idea that everybody has their own standards. So I want to share with you what a professor from Duke University said about this. Again, he's not a Christian. His name is Arthur Leff. He said, I want to believe, he's not a Christian. He says, I'd like to believe this. I want to believe, and so do you, in a complete transcendent, in other words, not among us, something outside of the human race, which would be the area of God, a transcendent set of propositions about right and wrong that authoritatively direct us, how to live righteously. He says, I wish we could believe in that. He doesn't. But, he says, with God out of the picture, now that's his view, remember. If a human says, thou shalt not commit adultery, he invites the intellectual equivalent of the grand says who. Now think about that for just a minute. So you tell somebody else, hey, you shouldn't do that. They could turn to you and say, who are you? Or he calls it the grand says who. Says who? Well, I do. Well, who are you to tell me what's right and what's wrong? In other words, what gives one person the authority to prescribe what's good for another person? How can we get others to obey our idea of morality if we're all gods unto ourselves? Why would one God tell another God what to do? And then he reviews, which I think is interesting here, he reviews some of the other, if I can find it here. Here we go. He says there have been all sorts of attempts over the last centuries to set up some kind of human value, human way to judge morality. He said, we've tried command of the sovereign. Hey, if the king says so, that makes it right. Well, that didn't work out very well. We know have some bad examples of sovereigns. The majority of the voters. Well, has that always worked out? Every time people go to the polls and vote, do they always vote morally? No. The principle of utility. What works best? Well, Hitler got the trains to run on time, right? So nobody thinks that was a great idea. The Supreme Court interpretations. I got 2 words for that, Dred Scott. There was a Supreme Court case in the 1800s. That was not a good case. So The problem is, he says, every one of these systems fails that says who issue. So what if the Supreme Court, 9 people tell you what is right? Do you have to, pay attention to that? I mean, could they make mistakes? Sure. What about the UN? Let's take it a step above the United States. Really? The UN, is that a body of morality? You going to obey everything because the UN says so? So where are we going to find this moral compass just among ourselves? So here's how he ends this. I love this ending because he is discouraged. He says, nevertheless, he's just told you there's nobody out there, there's no God out there. Napalming babies is bad. Starving the poor is wicked. Buying and selling each other is depraved. There is in the world such a thing as evil. Altogether now, he says, this is him still writing, says who? Then he ends with 3 sad words, God help us. Which in his case is being kind of sarcastic because he doesn't think there's a God to help us. I mean, you see what he's really painted himself into a corner. There's no human moral standard that'll work. And so you got to go outside, and that's where God is. You got to go outside for some kind of standard. Otherwise, we're all going to bicker, and we're never going to agree on that. I mean, think of it this way. You go bowling with somebody that you've never bowled with before, and he or she throws it down the gutter and goes, yeah, 50 points. And you go, no, that's not the way it works. Well, it works in my way of bowling. And you go, well, wait a minute, let's go up to the front desk, and you find the rules. And you show the rules. See, there's a standard outside the two of you, and the human race is kind of in that situation. Says who? So there's an argument for the Christian worldview. How about the problem solution? Which worldview? I'm going to collapse these two together. So everybody agrees humanity has gone wrong. No problem with that. Well, maybe we can fix it through, and I want to give you some of the secular answers that have been popular for the years, throughout the years, and see if you can catch on that there's some major problems with these. Maybe political systems will solve everything. Really? Well, it didn't work very well in North Korea, and China had the Tiananmen Square problem. A lot of these political systems look good on paper, don't they? It's just that when you put them into practice, you're dealing with broken people. That's what the human race is, according to Christianity. Christians are always suspicious of these utopian grand schemes. If we could only get this kind of political system set up, everything would be fine. I always feel sorry for presidents who come into office when it's their first term and they've been voted in, so the public is all excited. Hey, here comes somebody new, and they've made all these wonderful glowing promises. And 6 months later, people can't stand the guy. It happens whether it's Republican, Democrat, whoever. It's because you're dealing with flawed people in office. You're dealing with flawed people in the public. So, you hope good things happen, but it's not going to be utopia. It's never going to be utopia. So that isn't going to be the solution. What about psychology or psychiatry? And I don't want anybody to misunderstand. It's great to get help. So I'm not saying don't ever get help, but psychologists and psychiatrists have. I saw this one study that said something like, I don't want to get the statistic right here. This 29% of psychologists recently interviewed said they felt suicidal. That's almost 1 out of 3. So they're not fixing themselves. Now, they can help us. I mean, again, I'm not putting down psychologists, but this is not going to be the solution to the human race. Psychiatrists have the highest suicide rate of any profession, more so than even the military, and I know that's been an awful thing. So we've got problems that are not going to get fixed through psychiatry. Maybe affluence, is that going to help us? We'll shower everybody with money. Well, I teach out at Palomar, and I have them read an essay once in a while. It's called The Afflictions of Affluence. Isn't that a great title? You never think of afflictions. I mean, most of the students are out of Palomar because they want to get a good job and make money. And so I have them read this, and they go, Because this person that wrote it says, the more money people have, there's an obesity problem that develops. There's something called time squeeze. You got a lot of money in your pocket, but you don't have time to go do everything, so you get frustrated. There's a problem with too many products out there, and you feel like whatever you bought was the wrong one. cell phone or car or whatever. It says money doesn't solve psychological issues. The author says that loneliness has been increasing as America gets more affluent. So we're not solving all of our problems by showering money. So there goes another secular idea to solve things. But maybe science. Maybe science is our solution. Well, there was a science journal that recently reported that half the Dutch scientists, they went to, I don't know why, but they talked to the Dutch scientists, half of them engage in questionable research. That's not a small percent, they said half. Another journal reported, it's time to assume that health research is fraudulent until proven otherwise. Wow. And then I just made a short list of science blunders. If you want to put all your eggs in that basket and then assume science is going to solve your problems, the space shuttle disasters, thalidomide, cold fusion, Chernobyl, overuse of antibiotics, fin-fin diet, MTBE, which was a gas additive, lobotomies. I mean, all these things were given to us as Brave New World, right? Things will get better and better, and they were not. So science, again, I'm not opposed to science, so I'm not saying that. I love it. I've gotten a lot of use out of it myself, whether it's medicine or whatever. So science is terrific. It's just that it's not the all-powerful solution to the human race. Maybe education. I was talking to Chuck before we gathered here. I've had so many students in the last, let's say, 5 years that are showing signs of extreme stress. Ages 18 to 30, the suicide rate is climbing. And these are educated kids. They know more than previous generations. I had one student who came and sat down, and he was in tears. He's having problems with his girlfriend. And so I tried to, give him a little advice, but he headed off, and I thought, well, he seems better. About a week ago, I talked to another teacher, and she said, hey, did you hear what happened to so-and-so? And I said, no, he's one of my students. He tried death by cops, suicide by cops. He called up the local sheriffs and said, there's a guy out of Palomar College with a gun. It was him. And he was hoping the cops would shoot him and put him out of his misery. Thank goodness the sheriffs knew how to handle it, and he's gotten help, and he's a lot better. I had another student after class, and we were just talking about stuff, and he just burst into tears, and he said, it's not worth going on. Life really isn't worth it anymore. I said, do you have a few minutes right now? Because I don't want to let him go. And I don't feel highly trained in that field. So I walked him down to a behavioral education area where they had some counselors and sat there with him until they took him in and helped him out. And I didn't see him again, so I hope he's all right. I had another student on the phone that sounded really suicidal. And I said, I'm going to have a counselor call you right now. Is that okay? Yeah. So I'm seeing these things. I have to now, as a teacher, hand students a form at the start of every semester of hotlines they can call if they or friends of theirs are feeling suicidal. And so this is terrible. Education does not bring about a joyous thing. I mean, overall it's good, but there are people that are suffering and not getting help. So what we're saying then is Christianity is reasonable. Christianity is close to reality. I think it's even superior in other ways, and we don't have a ton of time, so I'm going to go pretty quickly over this. But Christianity meets our deepest needs that other, in this case, secularism we've been talking about, does not. It brings meaning to our lives. We're here for some purpose. We belong. We're part of the largest multicultural group in the world, Christians. One time we took a trip up to Mammoth, and there's this old ghost town called Bodie. Anybody ever been to Bodie? Yeah, a few of you. So there's this church. This is from like the late 1800s. The Bodie was a silver mining place, and then it dried up and everybody left. So some of the buildings are still standing, and I was just looking in the church, and I thought, if I'd been here 150 years ago, or 100 years ago, whatever it was, I could walk right in and they'd be my brothers and my sisters. We'd sing the songs, we'd read the same Bible. I'd be instantly connected to these people. We belong as Christians. The sense of justice, we don't always get justice in this world, but we say there's a life after this and there will be justice meted out then. We gain an identity. We are not just a name tag that we wear or a name on a desk. You get identity maybe for a while there, but that doesn't last. You retire or something happens. We get a identity that continues as children of God. We have hope for life after this life. We have security. Our jobs may go, money may go, a spouse may pass away. All these things can happen to us, but we're secure in God's hands. Secularism can't give us these things. Well, this is what I wanted to focus on the last part of our time together. If we have the answers, and I think we do, then you scratch your head and you go, why aren't we winning? Well, part of the reason, I think, Barna did a survey and he said he interviewed people that called themselves born-again Christians. I think that's a far more interesting label than just say Christians. A lot of people think if I live in the U.S., I'm a Christian, but born again starts sounding pretty specific. But only 9% of those people had a biblical worldview. Well, what's going on? Well, I think there are three issues, and this is what I wanted to focus on toward the end of our time here. One is we often don't know our own theology, and we certainly don't know what the secular people believe very well. We kind of get in a Christian bubble, and we don't know what they're experiencing and how they see life. And so I'm just suggesting maybe you can do some reading. I brought in a magazine that I like a lot. It's called World. It's published weekly, and it covers things like politics, film, music, science, news. That's kind of a Christian Time magazine. So they have things like that available for us so we could know more about our faith and the rest of the world. There's a book by Chuck Colson called The Faith. It's a really good book for just kind of learning theology without, well, that's going to make me sound funny to say theology is boring. It's not boring, but I've seen theology books that are boring. This is not. This is a really good book. Greg Koukl has one called The Story of Reality. Again, it's a really good overview of Christianity. He gets it down to 5 words. God, man, Jesus, cross, and redemption. Right? So he does those 5 things. There's a email that you can subscribe to called the Worldview Bulletin from a Christian perspective. I would suggest, I hope you consider Summit Ministries. Some of you recognize that name, Summit Ministries. They're in Colorado, and they work with young people to help them develop a Christian worldview, just the thing we're talking about tonight. It's a great investment of money because it does cost to go back there, but it's really good. We ought to be listening and asking questions. When people are talking to us and they come from a different perspective, we need to find out what they're up to. We need to listen better. I'm not a very good listener. I always want to do a data dump on people, so this is for me too. Here's a second problem I think we've run into is that we're just not as confident of our faith as we ought to be. So I'll be glad to send you, I think my name and the email is on that handout there. I'll be glad to send you a 4-page resource list that talks about Christian websites and Christian books in different areas like science or history of the Bible or things like that. We should listen to some good apologists. I have a website, and I can send you the link, or you can just wander around throughout the website. But I've got a list of some pretty good apologists that you might connect with. And after all, apologetics really bolsters our faith. Again, Chuck already mentioned what it is, but it's finding out the why of Christianity. We know the what, that's theology, the why of Christianity. Why do we think Jesus really lived? Why do we think he really did resurrect? Why would we trust the New Testament Gospels? There are reasons, really good reasons that are available for us. I lead a class, as Chuck mentioned, in Escondido, and one time I had to talk to the elder board. They want to know, what are you guys doing in your class? So I asked the class ahead of time, what are you getting out of the class? And the one word, I won't take the time, but the one word that kept coming up was, you've given us confidence. You've given us confidence. We now feel like we can talk to our neighbors. We can now talk to co-workers. I can talk to my kids. And it was confidence, confidence, confidence that kept coming up because there are good answers. And Chuck mentioned this. This is an organization I started a few years back called the San Diego County Apologetics Network. It's a mouthful, so I just go SD-CAN. And we have a brochure, and I think Chuck even referenced that you're welcome to pick up and take a look. It's a free, about a 20-hour, roughly 20-hour curriculum that you go through. And you can either do it through a book. I'll send you a PDF of a book I wrote if you'd rather just read and then you answer questions. Or you can watch some videos if you're more of a visual person. I've got some audio lectures if you'd rather get the information from that. And you can just plug that into your car, whatever you do, or as you're working in your yard or something like that. So you just answer some questions. and deal with me. And after the 20 hours and you fulfill the work, you get a really nice looking certificate for hanging up or showing off to friends or whatever. So we just want to make sure people have the basic foundations of the why. So in the course we talk about the existence of Jesus, resurrection of Jesus, science issues, other religions, things like, why is Christianity the only way? What's with that? Aren't there a lot of roads to God and things like that? So I hope you consider that as helping you out with apologetics here. Here's a third problem, and this is the part I'll spend, another 5 minutes maybe. We compartmentalize our faith, and we shouldn't do that. What do I mean? Does this look a little bit like your typical week? Sunday is a whole lot of Christian stuff, and that kind of dries up and goes away. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, I just didn't have room to put the rest of the week up there. But a lot of Christians live like this. They're really into the Christian thing on Sunday, and then it kind of disappears during the week. But if Christianity is a worldview, like Colson was talking about and Dobson, then it ought to connect with everything in our life, not just our friends that we see on Sunday, not just our Sunday classes, not just our pastors, not just our prayer life, but it ought to be involved in a lot of these things. I'll give you two quick examples of connecting worldview with things we might do. My wife and I saw a movie several years back called Rio. Maybe some of you saw it. It's cute. It's an animated film, computer animation, about this blue parrot. And he has kind of a low self-esteem, and he's got all sorts of problems. And then later on in the movie, he's told, follow your heart. Follow your heart. And he blossoms, and he's fine. Everything's okay. Now, is that a Christian worldview? Follow your heart. What does Jeremiah say? The heart is deceitful above all things. So, even something as innocuous as watching a movie, oh, isn't this fun? It's pushing a particular worldview that says you're basically good on the inside. Society has suppressed you in some way. Let it out. You'll be fine. Then there's Carl Sagan. He had this series years ago called Cosmos. Maybe some of you saw it. They've redone it. They have a new series. It's even more anti-Christian than the original one. It's with Neil deGrasse Tyson. I don't know if you've seen that, but I ended up grinding my teeth, so I don't see that one anymore. But when he wrote this book, Cosmos, and then he was the host of the series, the book starts off, this is the first sentence out of the book, the cosmos is all there is, or ever was, or ever will be. Now, I find that interesting. Coming from a scientist, this is not a scientific statement. He can't prove this. This is a philosophical statement, and it's a philosophical statement of materialism, isn't it? Because he says, whatever's out there, this is it. This is all we've got. It's all we've ever had. It's all we'll ever have in the future. So he's obviously a materialist. He's got that pair of glasses on. So how do we fight this kind of compartmentalism? Well, we could ask ourselves some questions like, how does fill in the blank, a TV show or a movie, reflect a worldview? Or we can say, what does the Bible say about fill in the blank? Let me just give you some examples. Again, I'm going to move along pretty quickly here, but let's say you're watching a television show. You can employ worldview thinking. You can say, wait a minute, so we're watching this show. What are the characters that are most admirable in this story? Then obviously that's what the author, the writers want you to emulate and think that they're all right. Or you watch how the story ends and you say, that reveals something. I'm an English teacher, so we read Hemingway once in a while. I've had kids say to me, how come Hemingway's stories are so grim? They always end up with death. Somebody's always dying at the end. I said, because he had no religious background at all. He had no perspective on life outside of this right now. I'm not preaching to these kids. I just tell them that's Hemingway, right? He was a materialist. There's nothing else out there. So there's no soul. There's no hope. People die, and life is tough. And the best you can do is just suck it up and go out there and die facing the bullets. That was Hemingway. So all of these areas, you can apply worldview thinking. Let's take economics for just a second. You got some people coming on strong with the ideas that socialism is good. Well, there's capitalism, there's socialism. Is there a Christian perspective? Yeah, probably, if you've thought about it for a while. How about transhumanism? You heard about that, the idea that We want to be immortal. We fear death. And so maybe someday the technology would get so good that we can put the human brain onto a computer. And then our body could go, but we'll be fine because we'll be on a mainframe someplace. Hey, they're working full time on this stuff. I mean, this is not science fiction anymore. Religious pluralism. You'll hear people say that all the time. They'll tell you the story of the blind men and the elephant. You ever heard that story? I won't take the time for it now, but they have all these stories that illustrate religious pluralism. And if you're coming from a Christian perspective, you go, there's something wrong with that. And you can think about it. And I actually have stuff like that on my website you're welcome to go take a look at. J.P. Moreland was talking about this compartmentalization problem. He said, if we're to be integrated, holistic Christians who make an impact on the world, we need to learn how to be Christian doctors or Christian school teachers or Christian lawyers. I'm putting that word Christian in the front. You could say Christian homemaker, Christian retiree, Christian grandparent, instead of just grandparent, instead of just worker at a store. The word Christian ought to be in front of our names as we go through life, whatever we're doing. Some other ways that we could fight this compartmentalization, we ought to consider where our mission field is. We have this idea that missions are overseas. Missions are in China, or missions are over in Indonesia, or something like that. Well, wherever you are, that's your mission field. As they say, bloom where you're planted. I was in a doctor's office once, and he was checking my ears, and he was getting ready to go, and he knew I'd just retired. I've seen him quite a bit, so he knew about me. And he was trying to be nice. He was just going to kill a couple of minutes. He said, so, you enjoying retirement? What are you doing? I said, I'm thinking to myself, well, let's see where this goes. So I said, well, I'm really interested in Christian apologetics, making a case for the truth of Christianity. I thought he would run out of the door. But he paused and he sat down. He said, really? And he started in telling me about his religious background. And we had a religious talk until the nurse came in and said, you got to move. That's pretty rare, isn't it? Doctors are about the first ones to get out of the room. So your mission field is wherever you are, hanging over the fence, Thanksgiving dinner with family members you don't always see, with the grandkids or whatever it is. That's our mission field. We should be talking to our friends at church. How are they incorporating Christianity throughout their week? How is it affecting their finances? How is it affecting the work with their job? Encouraging church leaders, maybe you could do this at your church to develop the mind. That's why I'm so happy with North Coast. They are really encouraging growth of the mind here. Jesus said we're supposed to love God with our hearts, sure, but he said also with our minds. So maybe you can encourage your church to really develop the mind. Maybe have a worldview instruction. There are all sorts of worldview curriculum things that people can take a look at. And of course, we should be the ones reading and praying more than we do. Some other ways. Maybe you're outgoing enough, you wouldn't mind talk to a Sunday school leader and say, hey, could I do a worldview section here maybe for a couple of weeks? Now, if you don't feel like confident doing that, what about starting an apologetics or worldview group at your house for a small group or something? You wouldn't even have to be the quote teacher. You just, hey, let's read this book together and see what people think about. We ought to support Christians who create really good media, because in our society these days, this is the primary way that ideas get out in our society and change people. It's through the medium of telling good stories. Take a look at television sometime. They're excellent stories, but they're telling you a worldview that they would like you to buy into. And so there are great organizations. I won't take the time right now, but there's one called Act1Program.com. What they do is they're Christians who are in the entertainment field. And they have seminars where people come in and learn how to tell world-class stories on the screen in effective ways. And thank goodness, Christian films are starting to get better, aren't they? Maybe some of you saw God's Not Dead. I thought that was a good movement toward it. Or maybe some of you saw, what's that, Lee Strobel, A Case for Christ. Did you see that movie? They're made better than they used to be. It used to be, wow, you didn't really want to bring a friend to see one of these, but they're getting better. It's thanks to groups like this Act One. They're actually now a subset of Master Media. Master Media does the same thing. They go into Hollywood, they go into New York, and they work with executives in that field and try to bring a little more Christianity, a little more light to these areas. So here's the challenge. Do we keep our Christianity quiet? That's pretty much what the society would like us to do. Go ahead and, sing your songs on Sunday, but let's just keep a little more quiet about it during the week. Or do we deepen and clarify our Christian commitment at an intellectual level? And we can do it. We've talked a little bit about that tonight. And a social level, connecting to other people. So the war is out there. I think we ought to be making a difference. I'll end on this. Nancy Pearcey says, having a Christian worldview means being utterly convinced that biblical principles are not only true, I hope we've talked about that some tonight, but also work better. They're more realistic. They connect to reality better in the grit and grime of the real world. And I've given you a list of some possible resources, but plenty others if you want to check with me about that. So I will end at that point. So Chuck, do we want to do some Q&A?
Sure do.
If anybody has any questions.
Let's just thank Gary first for presenting tonight. So you've been given a lot of information, but from that, I trust you have found a question to ask our guest. Just raise your hand. I'll give you the mic. We can record the questions and the answers. Anybody at all? So you all understand it. You're all good to go, ready to share, or you have a question? Okay, coming across. Here we go. Be patient.
So Gary, how do we sign up for the class?
Oh, I'm so glad to hear you say that.
We'll pay you later.
Yeah, if you just, on the handout, there's my name, but I think there's also one on that little trifold. You can just contact the San Diego County Apologetics Network and reach me that way. It's a really nice program. We've had, a bunch of people go through it, and they always say, that was worth it, that was good. Now, Biola and places like that offer things like that too, so if you don't mind paying some money, you could get one of theirs. But we wanted to make it so that you didn't have to go anyplace, so that it'd be in your own jammies, sitting in your own house, so it's not coming out sometime. You can just stay home and talk to me about it, and it's been a really fun program for me, and other people, their eyes light up. They go, hey, I've got some evidence now for Christianity.
Awesome. Next question.
Yeah, I think you brought up a good point about supporting Christian, like radio. I was hearing on the radio, like say for instance Cuba right now, how they're not letting the radio go through or the internet, and these people don't have hope. So I just think that it's just so important to support these ministries that help to try to get that out to the people there on the island.
Yeah, there are so many good Christian organizations now. It's just amazing. Para-church organizations, one kind or another. Yeah, I just mentioned a few of them tonight, but you probably have another dozen that you could think of.
Well, thanks for all the resources you've shared with us tonight.
Sure.
It's great. Videos, books, internet stuff. Yeah,
Well, we're living in the golden age of apologetics. Years ago when I was growing up, it was Josh McDowell. And Josh is still out there, but his son now, Sean, is a tremendous person in the area of apologetics. So it's a great time to find resources.
Yeah, you were talking about science before and the developments in science and how they're progressing. And you, of course, made a great case for Christianity vis-a-vis materialism. My question is, in the last year or so, and I hope this doesn't sound weird, but there's a lot of reports, undocumented reports apparently, about unidentified aviation phenomena. Now, you may say, well, that's weird, but if you listen to some of the people, Navy pilots, for example, I'm a Navy man myself, and I just don't want to just dismiss it because that sounds weird. And so I'm wondering how you would answer that issue. I mean, you say, well, it's nonsense, or do you say, well, it would fit in some way in the world, in God's view of the whole development of the human race vis-a-vis?
The only reason I'm smiling, I'm not laughing at the idea. I'm just thinking it's like he was paid to sit in the audience and ask that because about 2 months ago, I was curious about I teach at Sunday school classes once in a while at our church, And somebody asked me about that very same thing. He said, what about this UFO thing? So I got really curious. Hugh Ross is a Christian who's an apologist. He has an organization called Reasons to Believe. He wrote a book called Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. Isn't that a great title? Lights in the Sky and Little Green Men. So he's examined this very issue, and he says it's legit. He says there's something going on, but just to give it away here, he says he believes it's angelic, demonic beings that are doing this, because so many times the people that report seeing these things have been involved in the occult, and these things that are moving around out there are doing things that the physics of this world would not allow. They'll be going, thousands of miles an hour, and then they do a complete left turn, 90-degree turn. You can't do that in our world of physics. And he has lots of quotes from people who are not Christians, but they say there's some kind of, one guy calls them interdimensional beings. Well, I mean, you're in the ballpark of demonic forces at that point. So, and if you look at what these beings say to people when they're ones that say, oh, I got in contact, they're always anti-Christian. They don't buy into Jesus at all. They always say, be nice, and stuff like that. But I'm with you. I think there's something definitely going on there. But I don't think it's creatures from another galaxy or anything like that. It wouldn't hurt Christianity at all, by the way, if they discover life someplace else. That does not shoot Christianity down. We just have a big God that wanted to do life elsewhere.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yep.
I was wondering how we can convince the younger generation to believe in God, even though when they were raised as Christians, when they were younger, they go to college and they change. So how do we handle that?
Well, we ought to ask them, what are your questions? A lot of people they don't want to hear those kinds of issues, and they tell Christians, just believe. Well, they're kids. They're curious. Yeah. They've got 1,000 questions. And that's just devastating to say, well, you just need to believe it. You have to have more faith. There are answers. And if you just tell them, look, I may not know all the answers, but tell me what your issues are. Are you concerned about evolution? Okay, I'll go look up stuff on that. Are you concerned about what we're doing to the environment, that Christians have been bad for the environment? By the way, they have not. But so maybe that's their issue. And there are books that come from a Christian perspective on that. It is a golden time for apologetics, and there are answers for kids. But we've got to find out what those questions are. In many cases, we don't want to hear it because we're afraid that we won't have an answer. Hey, it's okay to say, I don't know, but I'll go find out for you.
But is there a book you can refer to so we can give it to them so they can read it?
Wow, that's a pretty tough one.
Because I don't have all the answers.
There's a book called I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. That's a really good one.
Okay.
But I tell you, if you email me, I'll send you that 4-page list, and I'll tell you which of the ones on there might be especially good for kids that are asking.
Yeah.
You know, they have books now for young kids called Keeping Your Kids on God's Side. There's a woman named Natasha Crane, Crain. She's writing all these wonderful books for parents in the home to be able to keep their kids focused on God and not let school, take them off.
Yes.
So the material is out there, honestly, it really is. They got little kids curriculum now for apologetics and all, so it's an amazing time.
Yeah, Stand to Reason has some great stuff. Alan Schleman does a great job. Josh McDowell's son, Sean does a great job of addressing these college or entering college kind of issues. Yeah. Another question back here.
Well, it's really not so much a question, but a comment. I think that our kids do have a lot of questions. This young generation that's coming into adulthood. And just like you said, we need to be honest with them. They're looking for honesty. They're looking for transparency. Yeah. And the worst thing we want to hear as a parent or a grandparent is we can't make them have faith in Christ. That's a spiritual thing. So yes, we can give them resources. We can point them into the direction of some resources that can help answer questions. But when it comes right down to it, it's a spiritual thing, not an intellectual thing. So ultimately it has to come. It's a work of the Spirit, not our work.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you mentioned that, because some people think that when we talk apologetics, we think apologetics saves people. That's God that saves the people, which actually I think is good for us. It takes the pressure off us. We're just supposed to be faithful. And we may talk to a person who walks away and says, that's okay. We were just faithful. Who knows what will happen years down the road? I've got all sorts of stories of friends of mine who got put down when they shared Christ, but people came back to them when they had troubles in their lives because they knew that person had something to share. So yeah, apologetics is just clearing the weeds so people can see what Christianity really is, and then God will work in their life.
Okay. Anything else? One last question? No. Okay. So let me mention that we have 3 guests coming September 10th for the next evening on Mars Hill. And you'll hear how we've put wheels on Mars Hill, and people have been inspired and moved out from here to reach people by utilizing different forms of building a bridge with people of other cultures and other religions. So you'll hear testimonials, and you'll meet some wonderful people that you may not realize have been part of this church or inspired by this church to get busy with utilizing apologetics outside of here. The next month after that is the grand opening of our art exhibit with, again, Joel Pelsu, coming from Arts and Entertainment in LA. And then the month following that, a friend of our guest tonight, Jim Miller, is coming to talk about 4 facets of critical race theory. So that will be wrapping up our November evening on Mars Hill. Hope you'll be here for all of them. Please thank Gary one more time for coming tonight. Thank you.